The Valrathi Empire had ruled the galactic core for 3,000 years. Their civilization spanned 400 systems, commanded fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands, and enforced order through a combination of overwhelming military superiority and carefully cultivated fear. In all that time, across all those worlds, they had never encountered a species that truly surprised them. Every civilization they discovered either bent the knee willingly or was crushed beneath the weight of imperial might. It was not arrogance that made them believe in their invincibility. It was experience. Admiral Corvash stood on the command deck of the Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical display with the detached calm of a predator surveying prey. Before him, holographic representations of 63 Valrathi warships hung in perfect formation, their sleek hulls bristling with plasma batteries and quantum disruptors. They had been dispatched to this unremarkable sector on the Empire's outer rim to investigate reports of unauthorized settlements. Preliminary scans indicated a primitive species had established colonies on 3 planets without requesting Imperial permission. It would be a simple matter: deploy ground forces, pacify the natives, integrate the survivors into the Empire's vast labor network. The species called themselves humans. Intelligence reports described them as bipedal mammals with limited technological development. They had managed to achieve crude faster-than-light travel only within the last century, a feat that would have been impressive for a younger race but was unremarkable by Imperial standards. Their ships were slow, their weapons primitive, their defenses laughable. Corvash had conquered 47 systems in his career. This would be conquest number 48, and likely the easiest. Lieutenant Vesic, his tactical officer, approached with a data tablet. The young officer's scales rippled with barely contained excitement. For him, this would be his first campaign, a chance to prove himself worthy of his family's military legacy. Corvash remembered that feeling from his own youth, though time and experience had long since tempered such enthusiasm with grim pragmatism. "The humans have responded to our demand for immediate surrender, Admiral. They have declined." Corvash allowed himself the faintest hint of amusement. Declined, as if they had a choice in the matter. He had seen this pattern countless times before. Lesser species always harbored delusions about their ability to resist. They would learn, as all the others had learned, that resistance against the Valrathi Empire was not merely futile but actively suicidal. "What else did they say, Lieutenant?" Vesic consulted his tablet, his expression uncertain. "They stated, and I quote, that they would defend their colonies with every resource at their disposal. They claim to have detected our fleet and are preparing defensive measures. They also warned us that attacking human settlements would be interpreted as an act of war against humanity as a whole." The Admiral's amusement deepened. War. The word meant so little when spoken by creatures who had never faced true military power. These humans had no concept of what war meant on an imperial scale. Their entire civilization was contained within a handful of systems. Their combined military forces likely numbered in the hundreds of ships at most. The Valrathi Empire could bring millions of vessels to bear if necessary, though such overwhelming force would never be required for something so trivial. Inform the humans that they have 1 standard hour to reconsider. After that, we will commence orbital bombardment of their largest settlement. Perhaps watching their cities burn will encourage more rational thinking. Vesic saluted and moved to transmit the message. Corvash turned his attention back to the tactical display, running through the attack sequence in his mind. Standard doctrine called for a brief demonstration of firepower to break enemy morale, followed by a ground assault to secure strategic assets. The entire operation would be concluded within a day, 2 at most. Then they could move on to more important matters. The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Corvash spent the time reviewing intelligence reports on human technology and military capabilities. What he read confirmed his initial assessment. The humans had developed adequate fusion drives and basic energy shields, but their weapons technology lagged behind even the most primitive species in the Empire's database. Their projectile-based kinetic weapons were museum pieces compared to Valrathi plasma artillery. Their missile systems were slow and easily intercepted. Their fighters lacked the speed and maneuverability to threaten modern warships. When the hour expired, Vesic reported that the humans had not responded to the ultimatum. Corvash ordered the fleet to battle stations, watching as his ships adjusted their formations and powered up their weapons systems. 63 capital ships represented a fraction of the Empire's military might, but they were more than sufficient to reduce a few primitive colonies to rubble. All ships report ready, Admiral, targeting solutions locked on primary settlement coordinates. Awaiting your command. Corvash raised his hand, preparing to give the order that would seal the fate of the human colonies. But before he could speak, every alarm on the command deck began shrieking at once. Officers scrambled to their stations as tactical displays erupted with warnings. Vesic's scales went pale as he stared at his console in disbelief. Admiral, we have a massive spatial anomaly developing directly ahead of the fleet. Energy readings are off the scale. I have never seen anything like this. Corvash felt a cold prickle of unease run down his spine, an unfamiliar sensation that he immediately suppressed. He strode toward the main view screen, which had automatically focused on the disturbance. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about physics and warfare. Space itself was tearing open. It started as a pinpoint of absolute darkness, a void so complete that it seemed to devour the light around it. Then it began to expand, growing larger with each passing second. The darkness was not empty. It roiled and churned like a living thing, crackling with exotic energies that made their sensors scream warnings about radiation levels and gravitational shear forces. The anomaly grew to the size of a building, then a city, then something large enough to swallow a moon, and then something emerged. The ship that materialized from the impossible rift was unlike anything in the Valrathi military database. It was vast, easily 3 times the size of the Eternal Dominion, which itself was one of the largest warships ever constructed. But size alone did not account for the shock that rippled through the command deck. It was the design that struck terror into the hearts of officers who had spent their entire careers studying military hardware. The human vessel was built like a fortress, all hard angles and armored plates that gleamed with an almost organic sheen. Its hull was studded with weapon emplacements that numbered in the thousands, each one larger than the main batteries on a Valrathi cruiser. Massive hangar bays ran along its flanks, large enough to deploy entire fighter wings. Energy readings suggested the ship was running on a power source that made Valrathi fusion reactors look like children's toys. But what caught Corvash's attention, what made his blood run cold, was the complete absence of any damage or wear on the hull. This was not some ancient derelict discovered in deep space. This was not a colony ship retrofitted for combat. This was a purpose-built warship, designed and constructed with one goal in mind: dominance. Get me a full tactical analysis. Now. Vesic's claws danced across his console, his earlier confidence replaced by naked fear. The computer is having trouble processing the data, Admiral. The ship's energy signature is unlike anything in our database. Preliminary scans suggest weapons technology several generations beyond our own. Shield strength is immeasurable by our sensors. Mass estimates put it at approximately 8 million metric tons. 8 million tons. That single ship outmassed their entire fleet combined. Corvash's tactical mind raced through scenarios, calculating odds and outcomes. Everything he knew about military doctrine screamed that this was impossible. Species did not make technological leaps of this magnitude. Evolution did not work that way. Yet the evidence hung before him on the view screen, undeniable and terrifying. We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel, Admiral. Audio only. Put it through. The voice that filled the command deck was calm, almost conversational, but carried an undertone of steel that suggested its owner was not accustomed to being questioned. This is Captain Gregory Barnes of the United Earth System's Warship Defiant Resolution. You have threatened civilian populations under the protection of humanity. You have violated territorial boundaries established by interstellar law. You have 60 seconds to power down your weapons and withdraw from this system. Failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile intent. Corvash stared at the view screen, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. A single human ship was demanding the surrender of an imperial fleet. The audacity would have been laughable under any other circumstances, but something in the captain's voice suggested this was not an empty threat. Still, he was a Valrathi admiral, heir to 3 millennia of military tradition. He could not show weakness before his crew, could not allow fear to dictate his actions. Open a channel. This is Admiral Corvash of the Valrathi Imperial Navy. You are addressing the sovereign military forces of an empire that spans 400 star systems. Your threat is noted and dismissed. I suggest you withdraw immediately, or we will be forced to demonstrate why the empire has remained unchallenged for 3,000 years. The response came almost immediately. Captain Barnes' voice had not changed, still carrying that same dangerous calm. Admiral, I appreciate that this situation must be confusing for you. Your intelligence reports on human capabilities are approximately 150 years out of date. Allow me to provide some updated information. What you are currently facing is a Titan-class battlecruiser, one of 63 identical vessels in the United Earth Systems fleet. Each ship is equipped with gravitic weapons, quantum shield generators, and an artificial intelligence capable of coordinating defensive measures faster than biological reaction times. The ship you are looking at could engage your entire fleet simultaneously and suffer minimal damage. I am being very generous by giving you time to withdraw. Corvash felt something crack in his chest, a sensation he dimly recognized as the death of certainty. 63 ships. The humans had matched the number of vessels in his fleet exactly, which meant they had been watching, planning, waiting for this moment. But that implied a level of strategic thinking and military preparedness that contradicted everything his intelligence officers had told him about this primitive species. You are bluffing. One ship cannot threaten an entire fleet, regardless of technological advantages. You will stand down immediately, or we will open fire. There was a pause, and when Barnes spoke again, there was genuine regret in his voice. I was afraid you would say that. Weapons authorization confirmed. Engaging defensive protocols. What happened next would be dissected by military historians for generations, studied as a textbook example of how technological superiority could overwhelm numerical advantage. The human warship did not fire conventional weapons. It did not launch missiles or energy beams. Instead, it did something that should have been theoretically impossible. It manipulated gravity itself. The Defiant Resolution's main batteries came online, and space around the Valrathi fleet began to distort. Corvash watched in horror as 3 of his destroyers simply ceased to exist, crushed into singularities by localized gravitational fields that appeared and disappeared in microseconds. Their shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, provided no protection whatsoever against an attack that bypassed conventional physics entirely. All ships, evasive maneuvers, return fire, concentrate all batteries on that vessel. The Imperial fleet responded with the precision of well-trained professionals. 60 capital ships opened fire simultaneously, unleashing enough destructive power to vaporize a small moon. Plasma bolts, quantum disruptors, and fusion missiles converged on the human warship in a cascade of apocalyptic fury. None of it touched the Defiant Resolution. The human ship's shields were not the electromagnetic barriers that Corvash recognized. They were something far more sophisticated, a quantum field that existed slightly out of phase with normal space-time. Every weapon fired at the vessel simply passed through the shield and detonated harmlessly in empty space beyond. It was as if they were trying to hit a ghost, a phantom that occupied the same coordinates but somehow existed in a different dimension. The Defiant Resolution continued its methodical destruction of the Valrathi fleet. Another 6 ships disappeared into gravitational singularities. 4 more were torn apart by spatial distortions that appeared inside their hulls, bypassing shields and armor entirely. A cruiser attempted to ram the human vessel in a desperate suicide charge, only to watch its prow crumple like tissue paper against shields that might as well have been solid neutronium. Corvash stood frozen on the command deck, watching his fleet die. Officers shouted reports that made no sense. Weapons officers reported that their targeting systems could not maintain locks. Navigation officers described spatial anomalies that made evasive maneuvers impossible. Engineering crews frantically rerouted power to shields that were being bypassed by weapons that should not exist. Vesic stumbled toward him, his scales pale with shock. "Admiral, we have lost 19 ships. Our weapons are completely ineffective. We need to withdraw immediately." The Admiral's pride warred with his survival instinct. 3,000 years of imperial dominance demanded that he fight to the last ship, that he die rather than retreat before a primitive enemy. But the tactical officer in him recognized that this was not a battle, it was an execution. The humans were not even trying particularly hard. They were simply demonstrating what their weapons could do, methodically destroying ships with a casualness that suggested they could maintain this pace indefinitely. "Open a channel to the human ship. Captain Barnes, this is Admiral Corvash. I request an immediate ceasefire." The destruction stopped instantly. One moment the Valrathi fleet was dying by degrees, the next they hung in space unmolested. The sudden silence was almost worse than the chaos of battle. It demonstrated just how much control the humans had over the situation, how easily they could kill or spare as they chose. "I am listening, Admiral." Corvash forced the words out, each syllable tasting like ash in his mouth. "We will withdraw from this system immediately. We will file a report with Imperial Command recommending that human space be designated as a prohibited zone. We will not return." Barnes' voice softened slightly, though the steel remained underneath. "That is acceptable, Admiral. However, I need you to understand something very clearly. What you faced today was one ship operating under strict engagement protocols designed to minimize casualties. We could have destroyed your entire fleet in the first 30 seconds of combat. We chose not to because we hoped you would see reason." The Admiral said nothing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "If the Valrathi Empire attempts another incursion into human space, if you threaten our colonies or our citizens, we will not show such restraint. The next time you see a Titan-class battlecruiser, it will not be alone. You will face 63 of them, along with support fleets that number in the thousands. We have been preparing for this possibility for over a century, Admiral. We watched your empire expand. We saw how you treated species weaker than yourselves. And we decided that when you finally turned your attention toward Earth, we would be ready." Corvash felt the blood drain from his face. A century of preparation. A century of building warships in secret, developing weapons that rendered Imperial technology obsolete, all while maintaining the appearance of a primitive species barely capable of leaving their own solar system. The humans had not been caught unprepared. They had been waiting. "I understand, Captain. Good. Then I suggest you leave before I change my mind about showing mercy. Safe travels, Admiral." The communication ended with a soft click. Corvash turned to Vesic, his voice hollow. "Order the fleet to jump to Imperial space. Maximum speed." The surviving Valrathi ships began powering up their faster-than-light drives, their crews desperate to escape this nightmare. As they prepared to jump, Corvash watched the human warship on his viewscreen. It hung in space like a monument to human ingenuity and ruthlessness, a stark reminder that the galaxy was far larger and far more dangerous than the Empire had ever imagined. Behind that single ship, space was beginning to tear open again. More rifts appeared, smaller but no less terrifying. Through each one came another vessel, identical to the first. Corvash counted them as they materialized, his heart sinking with each new arrival. 10, 20, 30. They kept coming until 63 Titan-class battlecruisers hung in perfect formation, a wall of steel and firepower that could have reduced the entire Valrathi fleet to constituent atoms. The humans had not been bluffing. The Eternal Dominion jumped to faster-than-light travel, followed by the remnants of the once proud Imperial fleet. They left behind 19 gutted hulls, thousands of dead crew members, and the shattered remains of Valrathi military supremacy. The empire that had ruled unchallenged for 3 millennia had just learned a lesson that would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. Humanity was not prey. They were predators who had been patiently waiting for the empire to make the mistake of threatening them. The emergency session of the Valrathi High Command convened 3 days after the disaster at what humans called the frontier colonies. The Grand Hall on the imperial homeworld of Valrath Prime had hosted countless victory celebrations over the centuries, witnessed the planning of successful campaigns across hundreds of worlds. Today it bore witness to something unprecedented in imperial history: defeat. Supreme Admiral Thraken stood before the assembled military leadership, his aged scales dulled by stress and lack of sleep. The holographic display behind him showed tactical recordings of the battle, played on an endless loop. Each viewing made the disaster seem more complete, more humiliating. 63 ships reduced to 44 in less than 10 minutes of engagement. 0 enemy casualties. 0 damage inflicted on enemy vessels. Admiral Korvash sat in the gallery, still wearing his dress uniform from the journey home. He had spent the past 72 hours writing reports, answering questions, and trying to explain the inexplicable to officers who had never faced a superior enemy. Most of them still did not believe his account of the battle. They thought he was exaggerating, that fear had clouded his judgment. But the sensor logs did not lie, and neither did the massive casualties their fleet had suffered. Supreme Admiral Thraken gestured at the hologram, his voice heavy with barely contained fury. "Gentlemen, we are facing a crisis that threatens the very existence of our empire. The species we dismissed as primitives possesses military technology that renders our entire fleet obsolete. Their weapons operate on principles we do not understand. Their defenses are impenetrable by conventional means. And according to Admiral Korvash's testimony, they have been preparing for conflict with us for over a century." One of the younger admirals, a career officer named Drakthar who had never lost a battle, rose to his feet. "With respect, Supreme Admiral, I find these claims difficult to accept. No species makes technological leaps of this magnitude without leaving evidence. Our intelligence network spans the entire galaxy. If the humans had been building a secret military fleet, we would have detected it." Thraken's eyes narrowed. "Then explain the sensor recordings. Explain the 19 ships we lost. Explain how a single enemy vessel survived concentrated fire from 60 capital ships without sustaining damage." Drakthar hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Perhaps the recordings were falsified. Perhaps this is an elaborate deception designed to make us fear an enemy that does not truly exist. Korvash could not remain silent any longer. He stood, his voice cutting through the murmur of skeptical officers. "I was there, Admiral Drakthar. I watched my ships die. I saw weapons that should not exist, shields that phase through normal space, artificial intelligence that predicted our tactical responses before we made them. This was not a deception. This was a demonstration of power, and we were fortunate that the humans chose to show restraint." Another officer, a grizzled veteran named Korvan, spoke up from the back row. "If what you say is true, Admiral Korvash, then we must determine how the humans achieved such advancement. Species do not evolve this quickly. There must be external factors we are missing." Supreme Admiral Thraken activated another hologram, this one showing a timeline of human technological development. "Our intelligence division has spent the past 3 days analyzing everything we know about human civilization. What they discovered is troubling. According to our oldest records, humans achieved spaceflight approximately 200 years ago. Within 50 years, they had established colonies on multiple planets in their home system. Within a century, they developed faster than light travel. That is not unusual," one officer noted. "Many species follow similar developmental trajectories." "True," Thraken acknowledged, "but here is where things become interesting. Approximately 150 years ago, all human expansion suddenly stopped. They stopped establishing new colonies. They stopped exploring unknown regions of space. All commercial traffic dropped to minimal levels. Their military budget increased by 3,000% almost overnight. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. Corvash felt his stomach tighten as he realized what the Supreme Admiral was suggesting. They knew we were coming. Exactly, Thraken confirmed. 150 years ago, the humans detected the expansion of our empire into neighboring sectors. They observed how we dealt with species who refused to submit. And they made a decision that few civilizations have the courage or foresight to make. They stopped expanding outward and started building inward. Every resource, every scientific mind, every industrial facility was redirected toward a single goal: survival. The hologram shifted to show human industrial complexes, massive orbital shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres, research stations buried deep beneath planetary surfaces, military academies training generation after generation of officers who would never see combat until the Empire finally came knocking. The scale of the undertaking was staggering, representing a level of coordinated effort and long-term planning that even the Valrathi Empire would have struggled to achieve. They transformed their entire civilization into a war machine, Thraken continued. But unlike traditional military buildups, they did it in complete secrecy. They maintained the appearance of a peaceful, technologically primitive species while secretly developing weapons that make our most advanced systems look like antiques. The Titan-class battlecruisers we encountered are the culmination of 15 decades of research, development, and industrial production. Admiral Drakthar shook his head in disbelief. 15 decades of preparation for a conflict that might never come. That requires a level of paranoia and discipline that I find difficult to comprehend. Corvash understood it perfectly. He had spent his entire career studying military history, analyzing the strategies of successful civilizations. The humans had looked at the Valrathi Empire and recognized an existential threat. They had calculated the odds of peaceful coexistence and found them unacceptable. So they had done what any rational species would do when faced with a superior predator. They had armed themselves to the teeth and waited. "What are our options, Supreme Admiral?" another officer asked. "Can we negotiate, establish diplomatic relations, and avoid further conflict?" Thraken's expression grew even more grim. "We attempted to open communication channels with the human government. They declined. Their official response was that the Valrathi Empire has demonstrated through its actions that it does not negotiate in good faith with species it considers inferior. They stated that any further Imperial vessels entering human space will be destroyed without warning. They also warned that if we attempt to attack Earth itself, they will respond by targeting Valrath Prime." The room erupted in outrage. Officers shouted over each other, their scales flashing with anger and fear. The idea that anyone would dare threaten the Imperial homeworld was almost incomprehensible. For 3,000 years, Valrath Prime had been untouchable, protected by layers of military might that no enemy could penetrate. But the tactical recordings on the hologram suggested that the humans could make good on their threat. Thraken raised his hand for silence. The gesture took several minutes to have effect, but eventually the chamber quieted. "We must consider our strategic position carefully. The humans have demonstrated technological superiority. They have shown willingness to use force to protect their interests, and they have made clear that they will not submit to imperial authority. This leaves us with 3 options." He ticked them off on his clawed fingers. "First, we could attempt a full-scale invasion of human space with overwhelming numbers. Throw everything we have at them and hope that quantity can overcome quality. Second, we could accept their territorial claims and avoid human space entirely, effectively ceding that region of the galaxy to their control. Third, we could accelerate our own research programs, attempt to close the technological gap, and revisit the question of conflict in a few decades when we are better prepared." Admiral Corvin spoke carefully, choosing his words with obvious deliberation. "Supreme Admiral, with all due respect, I believe the first option is suicide. We saw what one human warship could do. If they truly have 63 of those vessels plus supporting fleets, we would be sending millions of our people to their deaths. The second option is politically untenable. The Empire has never retreated before a lesser species. Our subject worlds would see it as weakness and might rebel, which leaves the third option. Thraken agreed, but even that presents significant challenges. According to our best estimates, the humans are at least 2 centuries ahead of us in military technology. Closing that gap will require resources, time, and intellectual capital that we may not possess. It will also require us to fundamentally rethink our approach to technological development. We have relied on conquest and assimilation for too long. We have grown complacent. Corvash listened to the debate with a growing sense of inevitability. The Valrathi Empire had built its power on the assumption that it would always be the strongest force in any given conflict. That assumption had just been shattered by a species that should have been easy prey. Now they faced a choice that no empire wanted to confront: adapt or die. He raised his hand, waiting for recognition. When Thraken nodded, he stood and addressed the assembly. Supreme Admiral, honorable officers, I would like to propose a fourth option. One that acknowledges our current disadvantage while preserving our long-term strategic interests. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. Corvash felt the weight of their attention but forced himself to continue. We should attempt to establish diplomatic relations with humanity, but not from a position of supplication. We should offer them something they need in exchange for something we need. Specifically, we should propose a non-aggression pact that includes technology-sharing provisions. Drakthar snorted derisively. Why would the humans share technology with us? They hold all the advantages. Because they are not as secure as they want us to believe, Corvash replied. Think about it logically. They spent 15 decades preparing for conflict with us, which means they diverted enormous resources away from other priorities. Their civilian economy must have suffered. Their exploration efforts ceased. Their scientific research was militarized. They won the battle, but they are likely economically exhausted. He pulled up a star chart showing the region between Valrathi and human space. Furthermore, there is a strategic consideration they must be aware of. We are not the only threat in this galaxy. There are other empires, other powers that might view humanity's technological advancement as a challenge. If we can position ourselves as partners rather than enemies, both civilizations benefit. We gain access to advanced military technology. They gain allies who can help defend against external threats. Supreme Admiral Thraken studied the star chart thoughtfully. It is an interesting proposal, Admiral Corvash, but it relies on the humans being willing to negotiate, which their initial response suggests they are not. Then we need to give them a reason to reconsider, Corvash said. We need to demonstrate that we have learned from this encounter, that we acknowledge our mistakes, and that we are prepared to change our approach to interstellar relations. It will not be easy. It will require the Empire to abandon traditions that have guided us for millennia. But the alternative is continued isolation, technological stagnation, and eventual irrelevance. The assembled officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Change was not something the Valrathi Empire embraced easily. Their entire culture was built on stability, hierarchy, and adherence to established protocols. What Corvash was proposing was nothing less than a revolution in imperial policy. Supreme Admiral Thraken stood silent for a long moment, his eyes distant as he considered the implications. Finally, he spoke. Admiral Corvash, you will lead a diplomatic mission to human space. Your objective is to establish formal communication channels with their government and explore the possibility of a non-aggression treaty. You will be granted full authority to negotiate on behalf of the Empire, within parameters we will establish. He turned to address the entire assembly. This will not be a simple matter of sending an envoy and hoping for the best. We must demonstrate genuine commitment to peaceful coexistence. I am therefore ordering the immediate withdrawal of all Imperial forces from sectors bordering human space. We will establish a demilitarized buffer zone and make no further territorial claims in that region. This will serve as evidence of our sincerity. The announcement sparked another round of protests, but Thraken cut them off with a sharp gesture. Enough. We are at a crossroads, gentlemen. We can continue as we have, clinging to outdated notions of imperial supremacy while the galaxy evolves around us. Or we can adapt, learn, and ensure that the Valrathi Empire remains relevant for another 3,000 years. I know which option I prefer. Corvash felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. He had just been handed one of the most important diplomatic assignments in imperial history, a mission that could reshape the balance of power across multiple star systems. Success would cement his legacy as the admiral who saved the empire from destruction. Failure would likely result in renewed conflict and the eventual collapse of everything his people had built. No pressure, he thought grimly. The diplomatic courier ship entered human space 2 weeks later, broadcasting peaceful intentions on all standard frequencies. Corvash sat in the small vessel's command chair, accompanied by a skeleton crew of officers who had volunteered for what most considered a suicide mission. They had been intercepted by human patrol craft within minutes of crossing the border, sleek destroyers that shadowed their every movement with weapons locked but not yet fired. The humans had been professional but cold, demanding documentation of their purpose and subjecting the courier ship to extensive sensor scans. Corvash had submitted to every indignity with as much grace as he could muster, understanding that trust would have to be earned rather than assumed. After 3 days of security checks and diplomatic verification, they had finally been granted permission to dock at Unity Station, humanity's primary diplomatic facility. The station itself was impressive, a massive orbital construct that served as both a meeting place for interstellar diplomacy and a not-so-subtle reminder of human engineering capabilities. Its defensive systems alone would have been enough to fend off a small fleet, and Corvash had no doubt that there were hidden weapons scattered throughout the structure. He was met at the docking bay by a human woman named Claire Henderson, who introduced herself as the Secretary of Interstellar Relations. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of calm, measuring gaze that suggested she had seen her share of difficult negotiations. Her handshake was firm, her smile polite but distant. "Admiral Corvash, welcome to Unity Station. I understand you have requested a diplomatic audience with representatives of the United Earth Systems government. That is correct, Secretary Henderson. I come bearing an official proposal from the Valrathi High Command. We wish to discuss the possibility of establishing formal relations between our civilizations." Henderson gestured for him to follow as she led him through the station's pristine corridors. "I will be honest with you, Admiral. There is significant skepticism within our government about the sincerity of this overture. Your empire has a long history of aggressive expansion and subjugation of less powerful species. Many of my colleagues believe this is simply a delaying tactic while you prepare for another invasion." Corvash appreciated the directness. "I understand their concerns, Secretary. They are not without merit, but I would ask you to consider our actions since the confrontation at the frontier colonies. We have withdrawn our forces from all sectors bordering human space. We have established a demilitarized buffer zone. We have ceased all territorial expansion in your direction. These are not the actions of a civilization preparing for war." They entered a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the curve of a nearby planet. The view was stunning, but Corvash forced himself to focus on the task at hand. Several human officials were already seated around a large table, their expressions ranging from cautiously interested to openly hostile. Henderson took her seat at the head of the table and gestured for Corvash to sit opposite her. "Admiral, you have the floor. Please present your proposal." Corvash stood, partly because it was Valrathi tradition, and partly because he wanted to project confidence despite his nervousness. "Honored representatives of humanity, I come before you to acknowledge a truth that my people have been slow to accept. The Valrathi Empire made a grave error in threatening your colonies. We did so based on incomplete intelligence and assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong." He pulled up a holographic display showing the battle at the frontier colonies. "I was there when your warship materialized from nothing. I watched your weapons operate on principles we do not understand. I saw my fleet outmatched in every conceivable way. It was a humbling experience, one that forced us to reconsider our place in the galactic hierarchy. One of the human officials, a stern-faced man named Director Patterson, interrupted. "If this is an apology, Admiral, it is coming rather late. Your empire has threatened, conquered, or destroyed dozens of civilizations over the past 3 millennia. What makes you think we are interested in peace with a culture that has built its power on the backs of weaker species?" Corvash met the man's gaze steadily. "You are correct, Director Patterson. My empire has done terrible things in the name of expansion and security. I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, but I would point out that humanity is not innocent of violence either. Your own history is filled with wars, conquests, and atrocities committed against your own kind. The difference is that you eventually learn to move beyond such behavior. We are attempting to do the same." Another official, a younger woman named Advisor Chen, leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Admiral?" Corvash changed the holographic display to show a proposed treaty framework. "A formal non-aggression pact between our civilizations, with provisions for technology sharing, cultural exchange, and mutual defense against external threats. We acknowledge that you currently possess superior military technology. We are willing to offer economic partnerships, access to resources within imperial space, and assistance with scientific research in fields where we still maintain advantages." Secretary Henderson studied the proposal carefully. "And what do you expect in return, Admiral?" "Access to your defensive technology, primarily your shield and weapons systems. Not the complete specifications, mind you. We understand that you would be reluctant to provide that level of access, but perhaps limited information that would allow us to develop countermeasures or adapt our existing systems, enough to ensure that if we face external threats, we are not completely helpless." The room fell silent as the human officials considered this. Corvash could see them exchanging glances, engaging in silent communication that suggested they had discussed this possibility before his arrival. Finally, Henderson spoke. "Admiral, I appreciate your candor. However, you must understand our position. For 15 decades, we prepared for conflict with your empire. We mobilized our entire civilization around the assumption that you would eventually come for us. And now, after one battle, you want us to trust you with access to the technology that ensured our survival." "I understand," Corvash replied quietly. "Trust must be earned, not demanded. I am not asking for immediate technology transfer. I am asking for the opportunity to prove that my people can change, that we can be partners rather than predators. Give us time to demonstrate our sincerity. Allow our scientists to collaborate on non-military projects. Let our governments establish regular communication channels. If, after a period of peaceful coexistence, you believe we can be trusted with more sensitive information, then we can revisit that discussion." Advisor Chen spoke up again. "What guarantee can you offer that your empire will not simply use any technology we share to develop weapons against us, or against other species?" Corvash had anticipated this question. He pulled up another document on the holographic display. As part of the proposed treaty, the Valrathi Empire would agree to independent oversight of our military development programs. We would allow human observers to inspect our shipyards, review our research projects, and verify that we are not violating the terms of our agreement. We would also commit to a gradual reduction of our standing military forces and a redirection of resources toward peaceful economic development. Director Patterson shook his head skeptically. "You are asking us to fundamentally restructure the balance of power in this region of space. To trust a civilization that has given us every reason to remain vigilant. I am not convinced that is wise." Secretary Henderson raised her hand, forestalling further argument. "Admiral Corvash, I think we need to be very clear about something. Humanity did not want this conflict. We would have been perfectly content to remain isolated, to develop our civilization without interference from external powers. We also understood that isolation was not a realistic option in a galaxy dominated by aggressive empires, so we made ourselves strong enough that no one would dare threaten us." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "We succeeded in that goal. Your fleet learned what happens when someone tries to push us around. But that does not mean we want to become the new galactic superpower. We do not want to conquer other species or impose our will on weaker civilizations. We simply want to be left alone to chart our own course. Turning back to face him, she continued, "If the Valrathi Empire is serious about changing its approach to interstellar relations, if you are genuinely committed to peaceful coexistence, then we are willing to give you a chance. But understand that this chance comes with conditions. We will be watching. Any sign of aggression, any indication that you are preparing for renewed conflict, and we will respond with overwhelming force. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear," Corvash replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The humans had not rejected his proposal outright. They were willing to negotiate, which was more than he had dared hope for when this mission began. Henderson returned to her seat. "Very well. We will establish a joint commission to work out the details of the treaty. This will take time. Months, possibly years. We will need to build trust slowly, prove to each other that we can keep our commitments. But if both sides approach this in good faith, I believe we can create a framework for lasting peace." The meeting continued for several more hours as they discussed specific provisions, timelines, and verification mechanisms. Corvash found the humans to be tough negotiators but fair, willing to compromise when presented with reasonable arguments, but firm on issues they considered non-negotiable. By the time they adjourned, the basic outline of a treaty had begun to take shape. As Corvash prepared to leave, Secretary Henderson pulled him aside. "Admiral, I want you to understand something. What happened at the frontier colonies was not an accident. We chose that location specifically because we knew it would draw an imperial response. We wanted you to see what we were capable of before things escalated further." Corvash stared at her in shock. "You deliberately provoked us." Henderson's expression remained neutral. "We calculated that it was better to demonstrate our strength early, against a limited force, than to wait until your empire committed to a full-scale invasion. If we had allowed you to believe we were weak, you would have sent hundreds of ships, thousands of troops. The casualties on both sides would have been catastrophic. This way, we sent a clear message with minimal loss of life." The admiral felt a chill run down his spine. Minimal loss of life. 19 ships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead, and the humans considered that a restrained response. It reinforced just how dangerous this species could be if pushed too far. "I appreciate the honesty, Secretary. It gives me a better understanding of how your government thinks about military strategy." "Good," Henderson replied, "because I want you to carry a message back to your high command. We are willing to work toward peace. We will support the Valrathi Empire's transition to a less aggressive stance. But if you ever threaten our people again, if you ever give us reason to believe that negotiations were simply a stalling tactic, we will not show mercy. The Titan-class battlecruisers you faced are just the beginning of our military capabilities. Do not test us." Corvash nodded slowly, understanding the implied threat. "Message received, Secretary." 6 months later, the Treaty of Unity Station was signed in a ceremony attended by representatives from both civilizations. The document was a masterpiece of diplomatic language, carefully balancing the security concerns of humanity with the political realities facing the Valrathi Empire. It established formal diplomatic relations, created mechanisms for economic cooperation, and most importantly, committed both sides to peaceful resolution of disputes. The galaxy watched with a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism as the two powers began implementing the treaty's provisions. Human observers arrived at Valrathi shipyards, while Valrathi scientists were granted limited access to human research facilities. Trade agreements were negotiated, cultural exchanges organized, joint exploration missions planned. It was not perfect. There were disputes, misunderstandings, moments of tension when old suspicions threatened to derail progress. But both sides remained committed to making it work. Corvash found himself appointed as the Empire's permanent ambassador to Unity Station, a position that allowed him to oversee the implementation of the treaty he had helped negotiate. It was strange, spending his days in diplomatic meetings rather than commanding fleets, but he found the work oddly satisfying. He was building something rather than destroying it, creating connections rather than severing them. One evening, nearly a year after the signing of the treaty, he stood at the same window where Secretary Henderson had delivered her warning. Captain Gregory Barnes, the officer who had commanded the Defiant Resolution during their fateful encounter, joined him. They had developed a wary friendship over the months, built on mutual respect and an understanding of what could have been. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Barnes commented, looking out at the stars. "Hard to believe we almost destroyed each other over territorial disputes that seem so petty now." Corvash nodded thoughtfully. "I have been thinking about that day at the frontier colonies, about how close we came to a war that would have devastated both our civilizations. If you had not shown restraint, if you had simply destroyed my entire fleet when you had the opportunity, we would not be standing here now." Barnes smiled faintly. "Restraint was a calculated decision, Admiral. We knew that completely annihilating your fleet would have left the Empire no choice but to seek revenge. By leaving survivors, by giving you the opportunity to retreat, we created space for diplomacy. Sometimes the best victory is the one that prevents future battles." The Valrathi admiral considered this. "In my culture, we have a saying: the greatest general is the one who wins without fighting. I never truly understood what that meant until I met you humans. You prepared for war with an intensity and dedication that few species could match. But when the moment came, you chose peace. That required a different kind of courage." Barnes turned to face him directly. "Can I ask you something, Admiral? What would you have done if our positions had been reversed? If the Valrathi Empire had possessed technological superiority, would you have shown the same restraint?" Corvash was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the question honestly. "A year ago I would have said yes without hesitation, but I would have been lying to you and to myself. The truth is that my empire was built on conquest and subjugation. We believed that might made right, that superior power justified whatever actions we took. If we had encountered a weaker species, we would have crushed them without a second thought." He met the captain's eyes. "But that is precisely why this treaty is so important. You did not just defeat us militarily. You challenged our fundamental assumptions about how civilizations should interact. You showed us that there is another way, a better way. And for that, you have my gratitude." Barnes extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship that Corvash had learned to appreciate. "To better ways, Admiral, and to the hope that other species can learn the same lessons without the need for conflict." Corvash clasped the offered hand firmly. "To better ways, Captain." As they stood together looking out at the stars, the Valrathi admiral reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The Valrathi Empire had ruled for 3,000 years, building its power on the broken backs of conquered species. But in a single day, a single battle, that entire edifice had come crashing down. Not because humanity had destroyed them, but because they had offered something far more dangerous than military defeat. They had offered hope. The human warship that materialized from nothing had not just been a weapon. It had been a message, a declaration that the old order was ending and a new one beginning. The Galactic Empire had never reacted in time because they had been looking for threats they understood. They had not anticipated that their greatest challenge would come not from force of arms, but from a vision of what the galaxy could become. Now, as the treaty began to reshape interstellar relations across multiple sectors, other species were watching with intense interest. Some saw opportunity, others saw danger, but all recognized that something fundamental had changed. The age of unopposed empire was over. The age of cooperation, however tentative and fragile, had begun. And at the center of it all stood humanity, the species that had been dismissed as primitive but had proven themselves to be anything but. They had not sought galactic dominance. They had simply demanded the right to exist on their own terms, and in doing so, they had changed everything. Corvash smiled as he watched a human transport ship dock at the station, carrying the latest group of cultural exchange participants. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, setbacks and conflicts that would test the fragile peace they had built. But for the first time in his long military career, He felt genuine hope that those challenges could be met without resorting to violence. The humans had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Strength was not just about weapons and warships. It was about the wisdom to know when to fight and when to seek understanding. It was about the courage to show restraint even when you held overwhelming power. And most importantly, it was about the vision to see past immediate conflicts toward a future where all species could thrive. As the stars shone steadily beyond the window, Corvash wondered what other surprises this remarkable species had in store for the galaxy. Whatever came next, he was certain of one thing: the universe would never be the same again. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was exactly what it needed.